My name is Avalon, and I am 31 years old. I never imagined a single sentence could redraw the borders of my life. But that is exactly what happened the evening my father looked at me with a strange, distant firmness and said, "Vacate the room." Those 3 words did not arrive with anger or hesitation. They landed cold, rehearsed, like a verdict already signed. My brother had just pulled into the driveway with his wife, glowing with the careful pride of impending parenthood, and the entire house seemed to inhale for them. I stood there, still holding a dish towel, unsure if I had misheard. But I hadn't. My father's eyes did not waver. My brother's wife didn't even try to soften the blow. She tilted her head slightly, a smile stretching just enough to sting, and added mockingly, "It would be better if you left the house altogether." The words echoed louder than any shout. In that moment, I felt something fracture inside me, not loudly, but completely. There had been signs before that day, of course. Subtle shifts. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Plans discussed without my presence. Yet I had convinced myself that blood carried immunity, that family disagreements were storms, not demolitions. I was wrong. My brother avoided my gaze, busying himself with luggage that didn't need lifting. My father spoke about space, about temporary adjustments, about understanding the situation, but every syllable felt hollow. That house was not just a structure. It was my anchor after years of working, saving, sacrificing. I had contributed, repaired, supported work emotionally and financially, but none of that mattered now. A new hierarchy had formed, and I was suddenly at its bottom. Humiliation is a peculiar kind of pain. It burns without leaving visible scars, yet it reshapes how you breathe. I nodded quietly, because dignity sometimes disguises itself as silence. I walked to my room, my sanctuary, my proof of belonging, and began packing. Each folded shirt felt like a farewell I never consented to. Each drawer I emptied whispered the same question. How did I become disposable in my own home? Outside, laughter bloomed, celebration, relief, the arrival of the favored son. No one came to stop me. No one said this was unfair. The walls that once carried my childhood memories now watched me leave without protest. When I carried my last suitcase to the door, my father didn't look up from his phone. My brother's wife leaned comfortably against the hallway arch, victorious in a way she did not bother to hide. My brother murmured something about calling me later, a weak offering of concern already diluted by guilt. I stepped outside into the evening air, heavy with the scent of jasmine and betrayal. The door closed behind me with a softness that felt crueler than a slam. And just like that, I was no longer a resident of the place I had called home for decades. The first night away was the hardest, not because of discomfort, but because of disbelief. I replayed everything endlessly, searching for logic in something fundamentally illogical. Rejection rarely announces its true motives. It hides behind excuses, timing, convenience. But beneath it all, I sensed a deeper truth, one that did not yet have a name. Days passed. I kept my distance, nursing wounds no one could see. Pride prevented me from calling. Pain prevented me from forgetting. Then something changed. The house that had once overflowed with smug laughter grew strangely quiet. At first, I dismissed it as imagination. But whispers travel quickly through relatives, neighbors, shared acquaintances, tension, raised voices, unease. Whatever certainty had fueled, their cruelty was beginning to erode. A few days later, the silence cracked completely. Panic replaced pride. Confidence curdled into fear. The same people who had treated me like an inconvenience were suddenly confronting something far more terrifying than my presence. I would later remember that eerie shift with perfect clarity, how swiftly arrogance can collapse. When reality refuses to cooperate, the echoes of that day would haunt them in ways they never anticipated. And though I did not yet know the full shape of what was unfolding, one thing became unmistakably clear. The story they had tried to end by pushing me out was only just beginning. Distance has a way of sharpening truth. The few days after I left felt like wandering through emotional fog. But clarity arrived with a phone call I never expected. It was my aunt, her voice trembling, words tripping over urgency. Something was terribly wrong at my father's house. The same home from which I had been dismissed like an unwanted guest had turned into A battlefield of accusations and dread. Their daughter, my brother's newborn, had disappeared. Not taken by strangers, not lost in some dramatic mystery, but missing under circumstances that no one could easily explain. The joy that had once filled those walls had rotted into terror. I listened in silence, my pulse strangely steady, as if some hidden part of me had anticipated this fracture. Life often balances cruelty with consequences, though rarely in predictable ways. What I learned next felt surreal. In the chaos of sleepless nights and emotional exhaustion, my brother's wife had begun unraveling. Fear magnified every insecurity, every whispered doubt. She became convinced that someone inside the family had brought misfortune upon them, that the house itself carried some curse triggered by conflict. Irrational? Completely. But panic rarely respects logic. My father, once immovable and authoritative, was suddenly a man cornered by events he could neither command nor understand. The household that had so confidently declared, "I should leave the house altogether," was now drowning in paranoia and desperation. And then reality delivered its harshest blow, not emotional, but legal. A lawyer arrived at their door, not dramatically, not with cinematic flair, but with the quiet precision of someone carrying irreversible news. Documents were presented. Ownership disputes, financial obligations, liabilities long ignored. The house, it turned out, was never the unshakable fortress my father believed it to be. Years of poor decisions, overlooked agreements, and fragile arrangements had created a structure far weaker than its walls suggested. Legal technicalities, invisible yet lethal, had matured into unavoidable consequences. The property was seized. The timeline was merciless. Appeals were useless. Within days, they were no longer homeowners. They were homeless. When the news reached me, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a heavy, reflective stillness. Revenge implies intent, but this was something colder and more indifferent: consequence. The universe had not acted out of loyalty to me. It had simply enforced realities my father had ignored while exercising his authority over me. The irony was brutal. The man who had ordered me to vacate my room now stood powerless as others ordered him to vacate his entire life. Stability, once weaponized against me, had evaporated beneath his feet. I saw them weeks later, not in the grand hallway where I had once carried my suitcases, but in a modest rented space temporarily offered by relatives. The transformation was staggering. Pride replaced by fatigue, certainty replaced by fragility. My father looked older, diminished in a way that time alone could not explain. My brother avoided my eyes again, though for entirely different reasons now. And my sister-in-law, once sharp with mockery, carried the hollow stare of someone humbled by forces beyond manipulation. Tragedy, stress, and loss had carved through their confidence with surgical efficiency. No one mentioned that evening. No apologies were offered. Some silences are too heavy for language. Yet everything that needed to be understood hovered unmistakably in the air. Power is temporary. Security is conditional. And cruelty, however justified it may feel in the moment, often returns wearing an unrecognizable face. What struck me most was not their downfall, but the fragile nature of the structures we mistake for permanence. A room, a house, authority, all of it can vanish with terrifying speed. The same life that had expelled me had collapsed under its own hidden weaknesses. Not because of fate, not because of cosmic drama, but because reality keeps meticulous accounts. If my story carries any meaning, it is this: never measure your worth by the comfort of those willing to discard you. Stability built on exclusion is never stable. Power exercised without empathy is always borrowed. And the ground beneath arrogance is often thinner than it appears. If this story moved you, if it made you think about dignity, resilience, and the unpredictable weight of consequences, take a moment to support the journey. Stories like this continue because viewers like you choose to stay, listen, and grow with the channel. Subscribe to True Revenge Glory for more unforgettable narratives where life, irony, and justice collide in ways no one sees coming.